Good morning. Welcome to day 3 here at IPC Apex Expo. It's the third and last day of the show, and it's actually been quite a successful week. The show floor, of course, has been a little bit quieter, but the quality of visitors here has been extremely high, and there's certainly been quite a bit of business conducted on the floor. I have a full panel of guests this morning, and the first of my guests joining me now is Alison James. Welcome, Alison. Nice to see you.
Very nice to see you, Trevor.
Okay. So you are the EU Head of Government Relations for IPC.
That's right.
And that's an area where there's a lot going on. I think it's also very interesting to see that IPC is getting ahead of the game, because typically a lot of the legislation comes in, starts at the European level and ends up trickling down into the US. So the fact that you're getting a seat at the table is absolutely superb.
That is absolutely the case, Trevor. Europe has always been a driver, especially on environmental legislation, and they talk about the Brussels effect. So whatever happens in Europe, they set the standard. It goes not only to the US, goes to Asia. And and companies tend to set their markers at the European level. So yes, it's very, very much a driver and very, very active on legislation.
So let's talk about some of the key areas of legislation that are out there at the moment. I mean, I think the obvious ones are there are a number of threats that have come up in the industry, both geopolitical threats, which started with from the US-China trade war, but more recently through the pandemic and the threats to the supply chain. What sort of legislative agendas are coming down the pike to try and help to correct some of this?
Okay, so again, a lot, I think. Europe, like every other region, in light of all of the geopolitical developments that you've talked about, is looking to examine its vulnerabilities and also its strengths and looking to address those. So they are looking to build up strategic industries and seeing where the vulnerabilities are. As part of that, we have something that is quite parallel to the US. They've recognized the importance of semiconductor chips. So we do have a CHIPS Act, which is pending in Q1 of the year. And we, of course, are making it a point to the European institutions that chips are very, very important. We very much support that. But it's not just chips. We need to make sure that we have a resilient ecosystem, that the whole electronics manufacturing ecosystem, that we look across the chain. There are more strategic dependencies and more vulnerabilities in electronics manufacturing than semiconductor chips. So that's something that we're working on. And we also make sure that it's a point not to manufacture everything in one region, but that you also look to strategic trading partners. So there are trade issues which come in there also.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very important point. That, both in the US and in Europe, the emphasis so far has been so much on building these chip fabs, which is great. But you need the PCB manufacturers, you need the OSATs, and you need, of course, the contract manufacturers to complete the whole supply chain.
You very much need a supporting industry around the manufacturing of high-end chips. Absolutely.
Now, I also understand that you've recently joined a European-US trade council. I'm not sure what the exact name is, Alison, but tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so that's the EU-US Trade and Technology Council. So that's part of the what I was referencing a few moments ago, that it's not possible for any region. It's not desirable, and no region is looking to manufacture everything on their own. That's just not part of global trade, right? So that means seeking strategic partners, and the US is a strategic partner for the European Union. So in trade and technology issues, last September, the US government and the European Union launched a Trade and Technology Council. That means closer cooperation on trade and technology issues and economic issues going forward. So as part of that, we've joined the Trade and Technology Council expert group, the working group on secure supply chains. So again, we're making the same message, that you have to look at vulnerabilities for your industries, and electronics manufacturing is a very strategically important industry. So let's make sure that we're mapping vulnerabilities and also addressing those, building up capabilities on both sides of the Atlantic and seeing where we can cooperate. So that's a dialogue that's going on throughout this year. They've already had their first meeting, but there's more to come.
That's interesting.
The next meeting in Europe in the spring.
And so, I hate to ask the question, but where does the UK sit in that, or doesn't
it? The UK, I'm afraid, doesn't sit in there.
Doesn't sit in
there.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, what other areas are you working on with the
So again, with the focus, and I think that was the question that you asked at the beginning, what has changed in light of geopolitical tensions and in light of the pandemic? So Europe generally, almost everything that Europe is working on is shaped by two big developments, and it's the Green Deal and digitization.
Right.
So sustainability is a huge focus in Europe across all aspects. So we see that coming down the track in the chips focus, right? Because that's also making sure that Europe has what it needs to meet what they call the green and the digital transition.
Right.
So that's why they're looking at energy efficient chips. So that they're not looking to build up industries that are not sustainable and are not contributing to the climate objectives that Europe has met.
Right.
But we have a host of legislation which is coming down the track under that banner. And again, looking at transparency of supply chains, looking at sustainability of supply chains. So in a couple of weeks, possibly, we should have a proposal coming out on due diligence, sustainable corporate governance. So that's really looking to build in sustainable supply chains. It's looking to really impose far-reaching obligations on companies to make sure that they're checking their supply chains for potential human rights abuses, for environmental damages, which can be very broad. And with that, there will be reporting obligations for companies. So this will impact all companies. Whether you have to report or not, you'll still be in a supply chain of the companies that are reporting.
Right.
So that's a major piece of legislation. We've been working with the Commission since last year as it comes out, always looking to make sure that legislation is workable for companies, that it meets its objective, but is actually workable for the companies who
I mean, I think
imposed.
sustainability is obviously very high on the agenda in Europe, but
yes, it is.
It covers such a number of different aspects, and ranging from the length of the carbon footprint that you're making to deliver goods. I mean, it makes no sense to be shipping goods halfway across the world to reach consumers. They should be made closer to the consumer to reduce the risk as well as to make it more environmentally friendly. So there's a whole range of different things, energy conservation. There's all sorts of things come into that.
There's certainly going to be a focus, and that's also this year, Trevor, going forward, that to make sure that all products that are being released on the European market, that we're going towards sustainable products. So that's a move to the circular economy. So carbon footprint is very much a part of that. Much more focus on reporting obligations, on measuring carbon footprint, on less hazardous chemicals, more energy efficiency. That brings in a raft of legislation. So I mean, I hear what you're saying about the length of supply chains, and that's coming in legislation in different ways.
Yeah,
right?
I'm just wondering how they're going to implement it, because the thing about the European Union is that they've always been very forward at bringing in new environmental legislation, but they've been very weak at implementing it or enforcing it, should I say. Generally speaking, what they do in Europe is they leave it up to each member country to devise their own method of implementing the legislation.
Enforcement.
And that doesn't really work, quite frankly. But I'm just wondering how they're going to put some teeth behind this legislation on sustainability.
Well, and again, there were so many different pieces of that, but they've definitely had a lot of dialogue with the member states. And if we look at the sustainable corporate governance and due diligence legislation, they are looking to see how can you increase the enforcement mechanisms and how can you have greater cooperation between member states. But yes, I mean, that's been recognised that there is an issue, one of many issues, of how to make sure this is workable. At the end of the day.
It's great to see it, honestly, Alison, the IPC's at the centre of this, as I said at the beginning. It's very, very important that we have somebody who knows the industry and can represent the industry at the table. We certainly want to keep up to date with what you're doing in future, and I want to thank you for coming in and giving us just a brief discussion of some of the activities you're up to in Brussels.
It's my pleasure, Trevor. Anytime, happy to come back.